All right, good evening, everyone. Today is Tuesday, October 1st, 2024. This meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck?
Here.
Councilors Raff?
Here.
Corrigan? Here. Afghan?
Here.
Winland?
Here.
Burdick is on Zoom. And Mbu?
Let me see.
It's on. Wait,
Here.
It's hard to tell.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Now, thank you very much. Will everyone please stand, remove your hats, and join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, October is Meals on Wheels month in Lake Oswego, and we have a proclamation here we're going to make in regards to that. I'm going to read it. Whereas there is a need to assure that no senior goes hungry or suffers from social isolation in Lake Oswego, and the need for home-delivered meals will only increase as nearly 44% of Lake Oswego residents are aged 50 and older, and 95% of seniors want to remain independent and in their own homes as they age. Meals on Wheels allows seniors to stay in their home at least 2 years longer. The program was started in Lake Oswego in 1972 by 7 people. The city of Lake Oswego memorialized its commitment to Meals on Wheels in 2004 by partnering with the nonprofit board Lake Oswego Meals on Wheels. The program engages 155 Lake Oswego volunteers in meaningful service to others, and there are more than 18,000 made-from-scratch, nutritionally balanced meals served annually to senior and disabled Lake Oswegans each year. Therefore, I, Joe Buck, Mayor of Lake Oswego, do hereby proclaim the month of October as Meals on Wheels Month in Lake Oswego and urge all residents in our community to celebrate older adults and the Lake Oswego Meals on Wheels program that supports healthy aging in Lake Oswego. We thank the Meals on Wheels board, and they are here today, and I'd like to invite Mr. Brokaw to come on up. And you have a seat.
Thank you.
We appreciate all you and the volunteers do to make this program run. It's such a huge volunteer effort, and we're glad that you and the other board members are here.
Well, we really appreciate the city in terms of the designation of Lake Oswego's Meals on Wheels Month. And it's the month of October, we really celebrate, and we have all our fundraising going on, and we try to help the community and serve the needs of the elderly. And all the meals are served out at the Adult Community Center, and we're happy to have you come visit on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you want to come and ride with us and deliver meals with us, we'd love to have you. It's a great experience to see that there is such a need for this in Lake Oswego. So we want to thank you. We do usually present a check to the city of Lake Oswego every year to pay back for what you give us to help provide the food for them. And we, through the collection of the Meals on Wheels, through Lake Oswego Meals on Wheels Month, we're able then to pay back the city for what they give us. We really appreciate it there at the Adult Community Center. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. So if people want to participate, they can volunteer. And if they're unable to volunteer, they can also contribute to the program.
Definitely, we love the donations, and every Monday and Wednesday, Friday is when we serve the meals. And you can come to the Adult Community Center and have a great meal at 11:30, 12 o'clock on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and that's the same days we deliver the meals. When we deliver the meals, if somebody needs an extra meal for the next day or for the weekend, we provide the meals for them at that time. We send them a bill for $4 a meal for each one they receive, but if they don't pay, we don't go after it. So it becomes a donation. So we definitely provide a great service to the people in Lake Oswego.
Good. And folks can find all the information about volunteering and contributing on the Meals on Wheels website, I imagine.
Yes, Lake Oswego Meals on Wheels.
Meals on
So
Wheels.
we appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Thank you. During the month of October, on October 14th, we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. And the city of Lake Oswego recognizes the profound contributions of Indigenous peoples to the cultural, historical, and social fabric of our community. Indigenous Peoples Day offers an opportunity to reflect upon the rich heritage of Indigenous communities throughout the world. Let us use this day to reflect on our shared responsibility to acknowledge the past, celebrate the present, and work together towards a more inclusive, respectful, and equitable future for all residents of Lake Oswego. We have a proclamation proclaiming Indigenous Peoples Day that will be signed and posted to the city website. And also, during the month of, well, half of September and half of October, we celebrate and honor Hispanic Heritage Month. It began on September 15th and it runs through October 15th. This year's Hispanic Heritage Month theme is Pioneers of Change, Shaping the Future Together. This message encourages us all to reflect and celebrate our Hispanic community members, including their ancestry and contributions to Lake Oswego's vitality. We invite all community members to celebrate by participating in programs and activities honoring the contributions of Hispanic and Latino individuals, both past and present. May we continue to uplift and support the voices of our Hispanic neighbors in Lake Oswego, fostering a more inclusive and empowered community for all. Thank you to everyone. All this proclamation, along with the others, will all be posted to the city's website. And next on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone here who would like to provide public comment? All right. Okay. Seeing no one, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. We have several items on the consent agenda, including Resolution 24-41. This is a resolution adjusting the budget for the biennium commencing July 1st, 2023, and adopting a supplemental budget, approving resources and requirements, and making appropriations. We also have Ordinance 2950. It's an ordinance annexing to the city one parcel consisting of 0.24 acres at 5077 Dawn Street. It declares the City of Lake Oswego zoning of R10 pursuant to LOC, Chapter 50.01.004.5 H through C, and removing the territory from certain districts. We also have Resolution 24-42. This is a resolution, City Council granting Portland General Electric a franchise to operate an electric, light, and power system in the City of Lake Oswego. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Move to adopt the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, motion made by Councilor Wendland, seconded by Council President Mboop. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Did Councilor Burdick say? Okay, motion passes 7-0. We also have a councilors only item here. This is the resolution 24-39. These are approving appointments to the South Shore Fire Station Task Force. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 24-39?
Move to.
39, yes, 39.
Second.
All right, motion made by Councilor Corrigan, seconded by Councilor Wendland. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, mayor abstains. That motion passes 6-0. 6, because I don't vote.
Oh, that's right. You don't vote.
Yeah, I approve these
have
folks.
power.
Great
You
folks.
didn't use it
Yes.
I know. No, we thank everyone, we had a ton of interest from the community in serving on the South Shore Fire Station Task Force. Appreciate Mr. Bruner back there putting that all together, and for all the community members stepping forward. We have a good group. Okay, next on the agenda, a public hearing. This is on Ordinance 2940. This is an ordinance of the City Council establishing a privilege tax on utilities. We will start with a review of the hearing procedure by Ms. Osenak.
Thank you, Mayor Buck, members of the council. This public hearing involves a legislative policy decision within the sound discretion of the City Council. The public hearing process will begin with a presentation by staff. Testimony, if any, will then be received from the public, subject to the time limit set forth in the agenda. And at this point, I'll ask if any councilors need to declare a financial conflict of interest.
No.
No.
Being none, including Councilor Verdict, we're ready to begin.
Hi, Dr. Rooney, good afternoon, good evening.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Councilors. I'm Erica Rooney, Public Works Director and City Engineer. Here before you this evening for a public hearing asking for approval of Ordinance 2940, establishing a privilege tax on electric utilities. As you will recall, we were in front of you September 17th, 2 weeks ago, a study session on this matter where we discussed the history behind the PGE franchise agreement and the ability for cities to impose 3.5% gross revenue tax, but also have the ability to go above and beyond that as an alternative. As we mentioned at the public hearing, other cities in the neighboring jurisdictions that have imposed the extra excise tax or privilege tax, of 1.5% include Portland, West Linn, Milwaukee, Oregon City, Tigard, and Beaverton. And what we're doing here is really asking that we charge the same rate, the 5%, that we charge to other utilities that are using our right-of-way. So this is technically called a privilege tax. It will show up as a separate line item on your or residents' PGE bills, just delineating that. We discussed it at length at the study session, and then the council directed us to go back and produce the ordinance, which with our council, we have got that attached to your staff report this evening. So I'm here to answer any questions you might have, but would ask that council adopt to approve ordinance 2940. Any questions?
Thank you, Director Rooney. Does anyone have any questions? All right, seeing no questions, we will go ahead and open the public hearing. Is there anyone here who would like to testify on this ordinance? All right, seeing none. Close the public hearing and entertain a motion. Someone like to make a motion?
Move to enact ordinance 2940.
All right, motion made by Councilor Afghan, seconded by Councilor Corrigan. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Director Rooney. All right, next we have a study session on code amendments to comply with the FEMA National Flood Insurance Program and the Endangered Species Act and its integration. Here we have Director Numanalu and good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Jessica Numanalu, Community Development Director, and I am joined this evening by my colleagues, Stefan Broadus, who is our Director of Special Projects, Tim Roberts, who's with our Engineering Department, and Michael McNamee, we'll have to get another chair, Associate Planner. We are also have Deputy City Attorney Evan Boone in the audience, who will be joining us if you have questions, which I am sure you will after the presentation. Before we get started, I just wanted to provide a little bit of background and context as to why we're here before you tonight to talk about these FEMA pre-implementation compliance measures. And I actually have a list here of acronyms because the information from FEMA is just full of a lot of acronyms here. So I may lose my train of thought here a little bit because it is a little bit confusing. But essentially, FEMA sent a letter to the city on July 15th of this year. And they notified us that FEMA was beginning pre-implementation compliance measures for National Flood Insurance Program participating communities, of which Lake Oswego is one, in Oregon in order to comply with the Endangered Species Act. And without getting into all the history of where this came from, essentially FEMA was sued a while back, many years back, for noncompliance with the Endangered Species Act, and they are required to come up with an implementation plan to comply with that. And so they are undertaking pre-implementation compliance measures that cities who participate in the flood insurance program have to comply with. So at that letter, they notified us that we had to pick one of three options for the pre-implementation compliance. They also notified us with, I'll tell you, 2 weeks' notice, that beginning on August 1st, FEMA is going to delay processing of letters of map changes associated with placement of fill in the floodplain. We are going to talk about that in the presentation, but essentially that could have implications for the wastewater treatment plant project. So after we got that letter, FEMA had held some online information sessions, which our staff, many of our staff here attended in August. And since that time, our engineering and planning department has been collaborating very closely. Fortunately, happy to have Evan Boone help us kind of navigate the legal issues to kind of understand the requirements and implications that these different options have for the city. And we'll go over those options in the presentation, obviously, but as you read in the staff memo, the staff recommendation is to pursue option 1, which is adoption of the FEMA model code. And I just want to let the council know that given the very constrained timeline that we have from FEMA, staff went ahead and tentatively scheduled public hearings with the Planning Commission as well as the City Council for the adoption of the model code, as well as sent out required notices to affected properties and the Department of Land Conservation last month in order to meet all the deadlines set by FEMA. But I want to emphasize and assure you that that does not in any way obligate the City Council to select that option. We just simply got that process started and the hearing scheduled to preserve your ability to follow through with that option within the FEMA deadlines if the council chooses that option. I believe you are all aware that there were 2 letters that were sent to the FEMA administrator, one in August from the Oregon Congressional Delegation and one from Governor Kotek last week, basically objecting to the short timeline and the abrupt announcement by FEMA of these requirements, and also to urge FEMA to provide additional time for jurisdictions to select one of the pre-implementation compliance measures. And they're also urging FEMA to possibly work with state agencies to develop a statewide regulatory package to achieve compliance with the Endangered Species Act while also complying with Oregon land use law. So those letters are out there. I've been attending the League of Oregon Cities meetings on these FEMA requirements, and I can tell you that to date there has been no response from FEMA to the Oregon congressional letter. I have not heard that there's been a response to Governor Kotek's letter either. So at this point, we have no word that they plan to delay any of their requirements. But again, anything can change over the next few months. I can tell you that many cities are very overwhelmed by the timelines that have been set by FEMA and very frustrated to have to choose one of these options. A lot of these jurisdictions don't have the staff who kind of understand the technical issues associated with the model code, let alone having to review development applications for compliance with that model code. And all of the cities that I've had interactions with have noted that they just don't have the time or the resources to adopt the model code in time in the sort of FEMA timeframe. It appears, from what I can tell, that a lot of cities are taking a sort of wait and see approach to see if the pressure by the state government will cause FEMA to delay their timelines. I think that Lake Oswego could do the same thing if you wanted to. That is certainly one of your options. We're going to talk about some of the considerations and consequences if you choose that option tonight. But I can tell you I am not aware as of yet of any city that has adopted the model code or that has even selected a pre-implementation compliance measure at this point. But that's not surprising given that people haven't, or the jurisdictions have until December 1st. So I would expect that they're going to wait as long as they can to kind of see what happens before they kind of adopt it. Our staff has reached out to other jurisdictions, floodplain managers, to see what they're planning on doing. And we've heard back from 2. One was Tigard and one was Beaverton. And they said they're leaning towards option 1 as sort of the least bad option for them to choose. But again, they're waiting in order to actually choose which option at this point. So with that general background and context, I am going to pass it over to Michael, who will provide the staff presentation. We are all available at the end of the presentation. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions, and so we're happy to answer questions at that time.
Thank you. All right. So I will just provide a brief overview of what we'll be talking about, and then for the first few slides, I'll pass things over to my colleagues in engineering, and then I will take things back over when we get to the options that were provided by FEMA. So Engineering will cover just sort of the basics of the requirements, how they're related to the Endangered Species Act, as well as the CLOMR and LOMR requests. And then I will discuss the options and alternatives that we have to picking an option, as well as the schedule and then the staff recommendation.
Hello, my name is Tim Roberts. I work in engineering and I'm currently in charge of doing floodplain management area permit reviews. I wanted to provide a short background context for our current requirements under the NFIP. So as a condition of being a participating community in the NFIP, FEMA requires us to regulate all developments within the special flood hazard area, which is defined as all land area that would be inundated in the event of a 100-year flood or a 10% annual chance flood. In order for FEMA's NFIP regulations to comply with the Endangered Species Act, they are implementing some changes to these construction requirements. The most pertinent one being the addition of the requirement for applications to submit a biological habitat assessment for any new or substantially improved construction in the special flood hazard area. This habitat assessment is required to demonstrate that the proposed development will not result in a net loss of critical habitat for endangered species. The FEMA Model Ordinance establishes criteria for what a habitat assessment must include. These requirements are in addition to the already established floodplain management area permits that are administered by the city, which mostly regulate things such as construction materials, methods, and finished floor elevations to protect new construction from flood losses. Typically, the city reviews anywhere between 5 to 20 of these FMA permit applications per year. Typically, there are more on years when there's a lake drawdown because more people are trying to do maintenance, but on an average year, I would say between 10 and 15. And majority of these projects involve boathouses, docks, or other similar structures. So here you can see a map of the impacted parcels within the city. We estimate there are somewhere in the range of 500 to 600 properties that in some way are affected by the special flood hazard area. According to the most recent data, there are 261 active NFIP policies in Lake Oswego with a total coverage amount of roughly $67 million and a total premium of $158,000. And I'm going to pass over to Stefan to talk about the CLOMR and LOMR requests.
Thank you, Tim. So as Director Numanalu mentioned, in that letter that we received back in July, discussed a lot of things related to the flood management area applications and review. It also included a paragraph stating that FEMA was going to suspend the processing of the CLOMR and LOMR requests. And what those acronyms stand for is Conditional Letter of Map Revision for Fill, which is processed pre-construction on projects, and then LOMR, which is the Letter of Map Revision for Fill, which is processed and issued post-construction on a project. So we received notice in that same letter that they were suspending the processing of those applications, effective 2 weeks after the issuance of the letter. So this could create notable delay for city capital projects that are in the special flood area, including notably the proposed wastewater treatment facility down in Foothills. So we don't really know what the full implications of this are going to be yet. As it says in the slide, it is worst case scenario, FEMA would resume processing these requests once the final implementation plan is released, which they stated in the letter was anticipated by 2026. There's no action to take for this council now. This is just an informational, but the project team, which includes myself and then experts in this field, including experts in the floodplain area, experts in environmental protection areas, we are working with those respective agencies to consider different approaches, different angles that we can present this project to try to minimize that scheduled delay, hopefully eliminate it altogether. So not really much more to report on that for now, other than just a heads up that this is happening and that the project team is working on trying to minimize it as best we can.
Okay. So to maintain our compliance with the NFIP, FEMA has presented us with 3 options. The first is to adopt a model ordinance. Second is to do what they're calling a permit-by-permit review. And the third would be to prohibit new development in the special flood hazard area. Option 1, the model ordinance would amend the Lake Oswego Code 500511, the flood management area standards, to include performance standards regarding no net loss to flood storage, water quality, and riparian vegetation. And to that end, it would have specific indicators and parameters for each of those items. Because of that, it would probably have a lower cost of review for the city, as well as a lower cost to the applicant, because they would only have to look at those defined standards, and we would only have to review those defined standards. The second option would be what FEMA is calling permit by permit. Applicants would need to provide a floodplain habitat assessment documenting that their proposed development would achieve no net loss of fish habitat. This would probably result in a higher cost because the entirety of impact on fish and habitat would need to be considered, as opposed to just the predefined standards. And so that would probably be much more in-depth review, both on the part of the city as well as on the part of the applicant, to show that there is no net loss. And the third option that FEMA has provided would be to prohibit all new development in the special flood hazard area. The primary concern that we would have for this option is that it would result in a regulatory taking, where the use of private property is so restricted that it cannot be used. And there are some properties that are entirely within the special flood hazard area. And so that could open the city up to some possible legal action. It also could have an impact on our housing production. And per our housing needs analysis that we adopted last year, we do need to produce about 2,000 housing units through 2043 to meet current and future housing needs. And there could be a potential impact on city projects as well. The new wastewater management, wastewater treatment facility being one of them, because it would be at least partly in the flood management area, as well as the redevelopment of the foothills area, because that would also be at least partly in the special flood hazard area. So if we decided that we didn't want to pick one of these options, we could do that because this is not a legal requirement. It's just something we need to do if we want to maintain compliance with the NFIP. If we did that, ultimately that would make us non-compliant with the NFIP. We probably wouldn't be kicked out of the program right away, but FEMA would have a process to ultimately basically kick us out of the program. They would probably start with probation. If we were ultimately kicked out of the program, there would be a few potential impacts. One, the most obvious would be that property owners would no longer be eligible for new policies under the NFIP. But the city would also no longer be eligible for FEMA assistance after a disaster. And federally backed loans for a property in the flood management area would also not be allowed. So there could be quite a few impacts there. I also want to mention that the city in our comprehensive plan has a policy that explicitly says that we should maintain compliance with the NFIP. So if we did go this route, we would have to amend that. Additionally, there is a statewide planning goal, Goal 7, that has to do with areas subject to natural hazards. And we would have to demonstrate compliance with that goal in a way that is different from how we do now. Right now, we can demonstrate compliance through complying with the requirements for the NFIP, but we would have to do it in an alternative way. Okay, so as far as the timeline goes, so we need to pick, if we do choose a pick-em option, we need to select one by December 1st. If we don't get back to FEMA, they will consider us to be in the permit by permit option by default. So that's an important thing to know. We are required to start collecting data by January 31st of 2025, and then start reporting that data to FEMA by January 31st of 2026. Because of that, FEMA technically says that we have until the end of July to fully implement the pick-em option. But because of that data collection requirement, we are treating that as if we need to do the full implementation by the end of January, because we don't technically have code requirements to require that information of applicants. If we did choose the model ordinance option, we are prepared to go to Planning Commission with that on October 14th, and then it would come back to the City Council on November 19th for a decision. And then that would make the effective date of the ordinance January 2nd. So that would be within the time frame that we need. So we are here today to get some direction from the council about which option you'd like to select. Staff's recommendation is to direct staff to notify FEMA that we are proceeding with option 1, the model ordinance, and to direct us to proceed with the proposed code amendments consistent with the FEMA model ordinance for consideration by the Planning Commission and the City Council, with a schedule that would allow the effective date of code amendments to be prior to January 31st, 2025. That concludes what I have. And so if you have any questions for staff.
Thank you all for the presentation and the way you broke this down. It was very helpful because it's kind of complicated. But just on the schedule, so if we were to take an option of delay, I mean, is there a way to, like a those wait and see option that would enable us to see if there is a response to some of these recent letters that have gone out and then still then later comply and meet these deadlines? Or is it like now or never?
Not that would preserve option 1. I mean, what the council could do is we could kind of move forward, and we could always change course if before you adopt the final ordinance, we find that there is a delay, and then you could just not adopt the final ordinance, and we can kind of just stop the process there. So that is one of the options. But if you just don't move forward now, then we won't be able to get the ordinance adopted in time to be in place by the end of January. And the key to having it in place by the end of January is we do not have any provision in our code to require the information that's necessary to show that they'll comply with the habitat assessment requirements in our current code. So by having that model code in place, when we have to begin our reporting starting on January 31st, 2025, we will have those standards to be able to get that information from the applicants so that we can fulfill our reporting obligation.
But we kind of have to start now to be in compliance, and we seemingly will be the only city in Oregon in compliance, since none of the rest are doing any of this work right now.
Right, and cities can choose the permit by permit. I mean, they would be in compliance by choosing the permit by permit option.
Okay.
So,
Or
or
the
the
other option.
no development option, but
I
I guess we'll steal what Tigard said and say it's the least of the bad options to comply with the model code.
I see. So in short order, they all may be moving forward then with these adoptions, because just given the planning commission timeline and council timelines, they're all very similar to us.
Right.
They'd have to be doing something
Right.
now if they want to do
We got
it.
the ball rolling because we wanted to preserve this option for the
Right.
council, but I don't know that a lot of cities had the luxury of that option, or maybe they chose not to. I don't know their reasoning, but I don't know. Did you have
see.
something to add?
Yeah, I did. Sorry.
One option is the code amendment option. The other option is the permit by permit. We're going to be automatically placed in the permit by permit come December 1 if we don't choose anything. Well, that sounds like, okay, let's not choose anything. However, the reporting requirement starts January 31, 2025. Well, the reporting is in January 1, 2026. We have to start collecting data January 31, 2025. We have to collect the data regardless of whether we go code amendment or permit by permit. In order to start collecting data, we need to collect that data from applicants. Tell us what the impacts of their development is, and they would have to do the habitat assessment. So I think you're going to have to do a code amendment to require that information to be given to us and address the impacts of the Endangered Species Act, really starting the end of January. Now, what happens if you don't start until February, March? You won't have any data there, and so you won't have any data from the applicants on that, and so it might be that the staff has to do its own study for those developments that get approved get filed between January 31 and whenever we do enact an ordinance that requires the applicants to give us the data. So my point is that there's a data collection requirement that starts January 31 under either scenario, and we don't have any code requirements to obtain that information from applicants at this point, because the applicants are only required to give us in our code to meet the current criteria. So.
Right, okay, and I know my colleagues have questions too, but real quick, while we're on this topic, what's the risk of not collecting this data for some interim period of time?
FEMA can take enforcement action. I don't think they're going to just kick us out of the NFIP program. I don't expect that to happen, but they have a process. It will be enforcement, and if we don't comply or don't provide the information, then I suppose they could take us out of the NFIP program.
But if we went long enough, they'd,
Right.
yeah, but if we're talking a month, 2 months, they're going to come and say, what were you developing from the date of January 1? If we want to see what was happening. Okay. Councilor Raff.
What are the impacts, if any, that this has on our residents that live on the lake or want to build boathouses on the lake?
So this only affects new or substantial improvement projects. If someone wants to repair a boathouse or a dock and it's less than 50% of the value of the entire structure, they won't have to comply with these new requirements. But if it's a new house, a new boathouse, in addition to what they already have to supply, which essentially is a plan that shows that the new construction is not going to be under the base flood elevation and anything that is will be flood proofed, they also have to submit now the biological assessment prepared by a professional as in addition to the application packet to be reviewed. So it's just kind of an added aspect of a review and an added cost. But with the model ordinance, they would have a template for what to do, essentially.
That even applies to Okay, so that is, and that even applies to the lake, considering that the lake is not really susceptible to flooding because they can open up the floodgate. The floodgate to make sure it doesn't flood.
It does still affect properties on the lake. However, the floodgate improvements did lower the base flood elevation significantly. So in practice, there are actually a lot of boathouses and docks where the finished floor elevation is above the BFE and they don't have to comply with it, or base flood elevation, sorry.
Like, I just want to know if this is going to, for people that live in the lake, this is a real issue, right? So, if people that are building a home or a boathouse on the lake, which is part of those houses, is this going to impact greatly anything going forward? Or is it, like you said, just a process for how to apply for the permit, and that's not really a massive impact?
My understanding is it would depend on the type of construction. I would imagine if it's something like a boathouse where the only thing below the base flood elevation is the pilings or the piers, it's not going to be a huge change. That's not going to affect.
I don't think anybody's going to build a boathouse underneath.
Yeah, exactly. If it's something more substantial, like someone's trying to fill in a property that is on the lake, there would be some impacts to that and some requirements that would potentially prohibit something like that taking place.
Thank you.
And is it the same for properties, is the lake the most onerous, and like the properties that are on these stream corridors that are also is that even less so then?
I would say honestly, the least impacted or the least critical is the lake, actually, because of how much the base flood elevation has lowered. From my experience, properties that are on the Willamette or the canal are the ones that are more significantly within the special flood hazard area.
Oh, what about these other streams, these like Springbrook Creek and?
Actually, Springbrook Creek only has a special flood hazard area in one specific area, kind of close to Pennington Park. Most of the small streams in the city do not have, are not part of the floodplain, except for the canal and the major rivers and lakes.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Mbu.
Yeah, no, I was gonna ask some of those questions, but I see that you said the city could be liable to some civil or legal problems if we don't comply. What? Yes, no.
You mean the regulatory
The
taking?
possible legal action against the city.
Well, that was, no,
Yes.
if we take option 3.
Yes.
Yeah, if we did option 3 where we prohibit all new development within the floodplain, then we would be susceptible potentially to lawsuits by those property owners for a regulatory taking of their property because they can't develop it. So that would be sort of the highest risk, I think, option.
But if it's coming from FEMA, these options are from FEMA. So, yeah. No, I know, but
the fact
I'm
is-
coming to our
Yeah,
option after.
This is an optional program from FEMA.
Okay.
We're not required to be in the National Flood Insurance Program.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, now, the other question I'm asking is like sort of common sense. It's, here we talk about Endangered Species Act. So FEMA want to protect some species. So why is it a problem that we're not doing that?
FEMA didn't want to do anything.
I know,
Which I would
but
tell you, they got
people
sued.
Sued,
Okay?
yeah, I know, yeah.
The
But
Endangered Species Act requires federal agencies to take action that is consistent with and protecting of critical habitat for endangered species. And so over a long course of years, this is the reasonable alternative method that they've developed on how the FEMA actions will comply with the Endangered Species Act. This does not relieve the city, private property owners, et cetera, from complying directly with the Endangered Species Act. So if we did not participate in the FEMA program, that doesn't mean all this Endangered Species Act compliance goes away. Okay? That gets to your question. If not,
and
please ask it.
then, but option one would do that?
Well, the three options are to maintain compliance with FEMA, okay, in order to receive the optional program of providing flood insurance programs at a discount, if you will.
So I think we should take option one as
Thank you, Councilor.
the list of all the people, yeah.
We're just asking questions right now. No, thank you. Councilor Winley.
So, as it pertains to the possibility of putting in a new sewer treatment plant, I don't quite get this because currently where the treatment plant would be, there's buildings. We're replacing it with a building. I have not seen, under your summary, it says there, in particular, they want to protect salmon and steelhead habitat. So we're not changing anything to that. How would it affect us getting a new permit for the water treatment plant? It's not like we're going in and taking part of the Willamette River or something like that.
So in the letter notice that we received, this was a paragraph almost as an aside, as as it relates to this, FEMA will also be implementing a delay in processing these letters. It's almost a separate item. We will need one of those letters in order to permit this project because it is being developed in the floodplain. And so are those three parcels that the proposed treatment plant, are they salmon habitat? Of course not, it's dry. But do they require a conditional letter of map revision in order to permit the project? Yes.
Okay, so it's just bureaucracy on top of bureaucracy.
Well, I guess I would also add, what it requires is no net loss.
Right.
And so the question would be, if you're removing some structures and putting in other structures as part of a single project, do you end up with no net loss?
Correct.
Well, you can either do that through looking at the indicators on fill and repairing vegetation, which is basically trees, other things, or you're going to look at it on a habitat basis. So you'd make your scientific analysis. So I don't think we are subject to, new development is subject to, it triggers the analysis, but the analysis is no net loss. So we would have to look at that.
And then I guess the other question is, would we be in the market for flood insurance if we built the new sewer treatment plant? Because, I mean, right now Portland owns it. We don't, theoretically. I mean, we're taking on new responsibility with full.
Yes, we would insure it. I don't know whether we would use the subsidized flood insurance. I guess the other thing I just wouldn't lose sight of is that this compliance with these regulations also qualify us for disaster relief. And for example, we're going to get about 70% of our costs from last year's ice storm recovered from FEMA. So although I do think the private flood insurance is really important for our residents and our business owners, FEMA disaster relief eligibility is important for this city.
Right. And I'm in support of doing whatever we need to do. It sounds, we can talk about that later. I mean, it's just the question part. But I guess the intention of this ordinance is such that if you were a city and you had lots of habitat stuff that you wanted to develop, you really need to deal with it and go through this process. I just see that this is just a huge overlay on our city that is just going to be creating one more checkbox that we have to do when we do permits. Is that correct? And if under option one, the homeowner or the applicant or whoever it is, business, it's minimally invasive to figure that out? Or do you think this is going to be like another 5% of the project that they have to go hire a consultant to say that I've never had a salmon swim through my house. I've never had a salmon, go on my yard. I mean, is it that type of thing, or do you have to have somebody come out and now we're going to have a consultant fee on top of our already high housing cost permit processes?
Well, in discussion of the options, I think that it's very likely that they may need to, depending on the scope of the project, they may need to hire a consultant, because I do think that this is complicated enough that they probably will need to. And in fact, the city will need to obtain a consultant to help us review these applications, which fortunately we got a response back from one of our current consultants who said they would be capable of doing that. So that is good news. But essentially, if we adopt option one, we have defined standards by which the applicants will know what their standards are going to be in order to show no net loss. And the city will also know what standards they're reviewing them against. If we do a permit by permit, it's just this nebulous, comply with the Endangered Species Act, no net loss, and they have to basically consider everything, from what I can tell, which is much more nebulous, and it's harder for them to kind of understand. So we think the most cost-effective is going to be option one, but is it not going to be onerous? I can't tell you that it's not going to be onerous. I think it probably will be, but it also depends on the extent of the project.
And because option one is clear and objective, we would have fewer appeals. So this could not be a new mechanism for people to say, okay, I don't want your house here because it's going to block my sun from my house. I'm going to try to slow down your permit, and I'm going to throw this onto you.
Is it clear?
Well,
Can they do that?
I don't want to give a guarantee, but I think it is certainly more clear and objective than option two, the habitat assessment on it. And in any situation where you have to achieve standards with consultant analysis, the obligation is burdens on the applicant, but once the applicant has produced their report, then the burden shifts over to opponents to produce similar credible evidence to challenge that. So you have to weigh the evidence. So usually we would need to see credible evidence, contrary analysis to challenge it, to make a finding.
But this is not opening up a whole Pandora's box where people could start stalling any sort of development or.
Well, I think under option one, you're looking at, how many trees, what's the fill, what's the impervious surface impacts. Sounds pretty clear and objective, much more clear and objective than option two.
Right.
These are mostly ministerial processes anyway.
Right, so it's a ministerial process, so there is no public notification for that. So not technically an appeal process through our building permit review.
Okay, I understand we want to save things. I just don't want people to use this as a leverage point to do something that they're not in favor of, and they're going to use this as a tool to block our residents from normalcy, I guess, of a fair process. So, and you don't think it will? We don't have any salmon in Lake Oswego, so it's kind of like.
And to that,
it's a
I
moot
think it
point.
depends upon the scope of the project. If you're putting in a boathouse on piers, or pilings, I think you're pretty good. If you're putting in a wastewater treatment plant, that may be a different, you got more meat on the bones to argue on that one. I think your run-of-the-mill type of development is fine. And I guess I would also point out, which I don't think has been mentioned, you have the lake, you have the upland stream corridors, or the stream corridors, and then you also have the Willamette River. Well, the Willamette River has the Willamette Greenway, which extends back 150 feet and doesn't allow for development, really, at this point anyway. So that to me is also not going to be a high impact area. I think it is going to be the lake, but I think the type of development you're talking about is pretty minimally invasive as far as objectors to development. So you may be down to stream corridors. People are trying to build closer in. Depends on the size of their property and what they're trying to do.
Right, but that would be in a developmental stage anyway, regardless of this issue, right?
Yes.
I mean, if somebody were to not like what's going on next door to them, they could do it in other methods with the development process versus just this new
Oh, yeah,
endangered species. That's correct, right?
we certainly have seen that, yeah.
Right, okay.
But I think, my point is, that if you're trying to build a wastewater treatment plant in a flood management area, is it clear and objective? Well, I hope so, but, there's a lot there to consider, type thing. You're building a boat house on the lake, I think it's much less.
Okay.
Aren't a lot of these areas are have the sensitive lands overlay on them anyway?
Not in the lake.
Not the lake?
There's just where the mouths of the stream enter a lake. There's some sensitive lands there, but mostly around the lake is not sensitive lands. The canals are a different story. The canals do have sensitive lands over them. But as Attorney Boone alluded to, along the Willamette, you have the Willamette River Greenway, so that is the sort of equivalent to
Some
the
extra
sensitive lands.
requirements as it
Yes.
is. And so is there some overlap between these requirements, between whether it's the Greenway or sensitive lands in some of these floodplain areas? Or is it just all additive, an additional report, basically?
So those areas have already been regulated in terms of flood capacity under our existing FEMA regs. What's new here is the habitat requirements.
Habitat.
Yes.
So can you guys bring the map up again? Because I think that I have a question that might help a little bit. I think these are the properties affected,
Yes.
but not, like when I look at, say, Mary's Woods, it's not the entire property.
No, it is
So
not.
even though these yellow map areas show all of the properties that are affected, but they're in many cases less
Right,
affected than
only
this
a
map
portion
shows.
of the site may be within the flood
I guess
management
wanted to go there because I feel like that helps sort of just understand that this is as bad as it could be, I guess is where I go.
Yeah.
I was going to add, in practice, a lot of times for projects on the lake, everything that's already there is already above the base flood elevation. And so the extent of the current review is just them having a surveyor going out, marking where the base flood elevation is and saying, check, the house is not anywhere near this. We don't have to worry about it. There's a lot of properties where they're abutting the special flood hazard area, but it is so far downhill that it doesn't affect the building at all, and it would only impact them if they decided, I want to build right here, right next to the water, essentially. So it's not usually the entire property that's encompassed, but
But we do have properties that are entirely
Yeah.
encumbered, and we do have properties that, where they have development in the floodplain, such as boathouses and docks and those types of things that would still have to comply with this, so.
But how about Spring Brook?
Hold on. It's not your turn.
Yeah, but
It's not your turn. Sir Afghan, thank you
Yeah,
for your patience. You're in line.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I heard the answer to some of my questions, but I want to be black and white with it. So if I have a property that the first 30 feet is below the bench line, and the next 70 feet is above, and I put a building up there, everything is okay, doesn't have to go through this process, correct?
yeah, essentially what FEMA requires is that the applicant submits something from a surveyor that just shows that the building is not within the base flood elevation,
Okay.
and then they don't have to do anything else.
Thank
They just
you.
have to demonstrate that.
Next question is, when this habitat assessment is done, is it just required for your property, or does it keep going until it hits the major stream? So for example, if we look at the wastewater treatment, we're in a specific area, a specific property, but adjacent to us, it keeps on going. Does that assessment have to be for your property only, or does it keep going?
My understanding is it's only what is on the property as it relates to the habitat. So a lot of the criteria involve things like dissolved oxygen, how that would be impacted in the water, turbidity in the water, so sediment entering the water, things like that. And it only looks at if we have a 100-year flood and this property is flooded, will the proposed development impact whatever endangered species are in that floodwater, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
I would add, just as a note, it depends on the scope of the development in order to achieve no net loss. So I think that's true, but if your development would result in a loss, then you might have to go to a neighbor downstream to acquire some sort of rights for flood capacity type of thing.
Okay.
So it depends on the scope.
Thank you.
Also, there are properties along the lake that abut Lake Horror property, and so obviously that doesn't belong to their property, but if it affects that and it's within the base flood elevation, of course, that will apply to that site as part of the site as well.
I'll save my commentaries when the council is talking about this. I think I heard you saying that the city has the accountability to review this application and these assessments. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct. We have to determine compliance with these requirements that are in the model code.
And we have to develop all of these criterias, staffing, and whatever it takes to execute this, implement this plan, correct?
Well, the criteria, if you adopt the model code, the criteria are in the code, and we would have to implement that. But given that some of this is pretty technical and we don't have staff on with that type of expertise, we would need to use consultant services to help review some applications. Probably not all applications, but definitely some of the more extensive, depending on the scope.
Okay, thank you. When we talk about fill, is it really fill, like dirt coming in and fill, or is it infill, meaning we're going to put a building here and it takes a space out of this area? Do we know what that definition is?
I believe FEMA defines it as fill, like if you were changing the topography of the site.
And thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Afghan. Councilor Corrigan.
What are the advantages of delaying?
Well, if the advantages of delaying is if we get the timing right and the FEMA does cave to pressure from the state and delays these implementation deadlines, then we would not have adopted any code, and we can kind of take our time in terms of selecting our option and implementing it. But again, we don't have any certainty as to whether that's going to happen. As I mentioned before, you know, we've scheduled a hearing tentatively for the Planning Commission next month and for the City Council in November. There is a little bit of wiggle room where the council could make their decision, but not adopt the findings until later in November, just as long as we time it so that the effective date is before the end of January. So you could do a little bit of delaying tactic there, but otherwise, if you just wanted to kind of wait and see, like maybe what some of the other jurisdictions are doing, yeah, I don't know that the advantage would be that we don't have to do anything within that time frame. But again, we're losing that window if they don't extend the timeline. Hopefully that makes
Right,
sense.
so it's kind of a, do you feel lucky kind of a, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And you could certainly delay picking an option until December 1st. I mean, that's when you have to actually tell them, but you can kind of move forward but not notify FEMA until the very last minute if you wanted to kind of
Well,
wait.
and you may still have additional delay options. If FEMA responds to the request from the congressional delegation, they essentially only ask for a 4-month delay. The governor's letter, she asked for consultation with state agencies. And so if you say to staff today, yes, we think, given what we know today, we like this option, but if FEMA delays or if it looks like the regs are going to be modified, then please come back to us, staff, before you step through the process. You still have, in other words, you don't have to decide today to delay. You'll have more choices.
Off-ramps, maybe.
Yeah. I don't know if it's off-ramps, but you'll have the slow lane.
Slow lane. Maybe off-ramp. You never know.
Maybe. I think that there will be regulations. The question is, and Jessica's heard me say this, in Oregon, we already have a lot of regulations related to Goal 5, which relate to habitat and species preservation around streams. So it's possible there could be some kind of a reconciliation process between the state and FEMA. But we don't know whether FEMA is willing to engage in this. This process has been highly unusual in terms of how they've stepped through it administratively. So it could be that they want to clean that up before they actually implement the program.
Right.
But again, you don't have to delay now. We do have this lined out to move, which is the best thing to do for the property owners of the community, really, in the long run. But if we're able to slow it down later or adjust, then you'll still have time to do that.
But it is, the model code is, we consider it clear and objective. So if it applies to housing development. I mean, I know Mr. Boone said kind
I
of clear
haven't
enough,
litigated
but-
that yet.
And I would just say, if you would like that legal advice from our office, we're happy to provide it to you confidentially.
It certainly seems on its parameters to be clear and objective, and that's about as far as I can go. I mean, I can't guarantee you that somebody is not going to, to challenge it. And
Yeah.
as my distinguished colleague will admit, in the Rogue Valley case, Luba said, there's one thing we know that's not clear and objective is clear and objective standards. There's always a question of what is clear and objective. So I don't want to guarantee it, but it certainly is, it appears to be clear and objective at this point.
But again, this is only related to habitat for endangered species.
That's
The
right.
areas that are already regulated,
Areas
By the
already
FEMA
regulated.
part.
but because they're in the whatever you call the flood area.
So do we have endangered species in these floods?
Sure, we have salmon in the Willamette River. Let's be clear.
Willamette,
There's
sure.
there's salmon in the
Or the
Willamette
lake.
River. There's probably no, not in the lake. Here's the argument about the lake. I'm sorry, I've dealt with these kinds of issues my entire career. The water from the lake ends up in the Willamette River. So,
Vice versa.
well, the stuff in
Anything
Yeah.
that's in the Tualatin is
there is
floating.
some.
I'm not suggesting that the lake isn't different. I agree with you that the lake is different and that there aren't fish in the lake. But the decisions that you make about what happens on your property does affect water quality in the lake, which then does ultimately affect water quality in the Willamette. So I don't think it's worth having that argument right now, because I think we can have that argument with FEMA
And it's all
later.
fish habitat. We're talking fish.
Endangered species fish, though. We're not talking about carp or
Yeah, but just
bass,
endangered fish,
which is what I've seen in the
Endangered.
not
lake.
uplands, not birds? Birds?
No, I think it's fish habitat. That's why we're talking about
fish.
water.
Do you have the capacity to implement this? Let's just say the council said option one, go for it, and then we can always make adjustments later. Do you have the capacity to implement this by the deadlines?
Oh, by the deadlines, yes.
Yeah, they have a plan.
So,
Yeah, we've
I mean,
outlined a process
there's
to
no
do
real
that.
harm in us. I mean, you have the bandwidth within the department to make it happen, I guess is my question, right? We're not saying that we're going
We're
to,
making it happen.
yeah. So I mean, so there's no downside risk to progressing
No.
in this and just making it, I mean, we may be the poster children of Oregon that we got our stuff done the first, so we get an A+ and a star. Is that kind of how it might be?
That's how we are.
Yeah.
What about the, down in the floodplain, down there in foothills, those geese? And we put those plastic coyotes out. Wonder what FEMA would think about those plastic coyotes.
I don't
we get a
believe
permit
Canada
for those?
geese are an endangered species, and in fact, they may be an invasive species.
We're making them endangered.
Right. Well,
And
they're
then we move
Canadian,
that. I
they're
mean,
invasive.
I'm very concerned about those geese. Well, so it seems like, as Councilor Winden was summarizing, oh, did you get your Springbrook Creek question answered?
No, because
Is it really important?
because you hijacked the conversation. So, I mean,
Is it really
no, it's important because
Is it going to change the outcome?
no, but I'm asking. One is we did some development on Springbrook.
The city?
If not private property, private people like the lake folks, there's also folks who live on Springbrook and they have the right to ask. There's not only the lake in Lake Oswego, there's some other. So yeah, so on Springbrook, if we talk salmon, what are the endangered species on Springbrook? And so why are they on the map? It's the yellow things. We have some properties on Springbrook, and honestly, I have 2 properties on Springbrook, and their development there. What would be the consequences on developing those, like the bridge?
Is it on? Do you know, is Springbrook on the?
You see the section kind of in the middle off to the left, there is a section of Springbrook that has a special flood hazard area, but the whole stream is not.
Over here?
Yeah, right there where the mouse is.
Yes.
Such a small space.
It's, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. And again, these are all areas that are in the flood management area.
Yeah.
Whether or not they have a habitat value. So these areas are already on the FEMA map.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
Yeah, and FEMA had even
Right.
surveyed all that.
So as long as your development's not in the
That's right.
floodway.
The flood plan.
Don't build on the brook.
So it seems like Councilwoman was saying, it seems prudent to move ahead. I mean, it is important in the community to maintain our ability of residents to have their, NFIP-backed flood insurance.
Right.
And I think the city manager has a good solution. If there are changes that materialize, I did get an email, so it does seem like FEMA's engaging. They want to know, so maybe, I don't know if that's just, but whatever, that we could come back and reevaluate if we learn new information, but otherwise to continue on the timeline that the planning director has suggested. Does everyone think that's a good idea?
Yeah, we should move. Yeah.
Thank you for really bringing this forward. I mean, it is very, oh yes, is Councilor Burdick, is she like, giving the thumbs up, or? Okay, yeah, thank you. I mean, this was, you did a great job breaking this down and explaining it in an easy to understand fashion. Yeah, we appreciate the help. Good job. Thank you all. Okay. That was straightforward. I thought we might be done by 5:50.
5:50, well.
I know. I thought this was going to be a record council meeting. Is there any,
Once started.
oh,
is the
we didn't
link.
make, do we need a motion?
Yes.
No.
We need a
Do you want us to
motion.
make, or was that just is that clear enough?
Yes.
I mean, I feel like they got direction.
The work session.
Staff is going to, not necessarily, I
Okay,
suppose. with it.
as long as, yeah,
Staff's
okay.
going to go forward.
Sorry, I just noticed.
Engage.
Unless you say no.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you. We look forward to having them back. Is there any information from the council? City manager.
I have just a couple of really tiny things. In addition to everything else that you proclaimed tonight, October is also Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So you will see our firefighters sporting pink T-shirts and uniforms in the month of October. I think that they're actually black with pink on them. They're really cool looking. And we will have a pink-doored police car out there in honor of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. The other thing is October is Fire Prevention Month. So it's a great month to take a look at the area around your home, rake up the leaves, maybe trim the vegetation back, and just remember fire season doesn't really end until around the middle of November. Sadly. Yeah, I try to do that when the daylight savings time, so that's coming the first weekend in November. So even if you have those 10-year batteries, I can tell you from personal experience, they don't last 10 years. So anyway, that's all I got.
Thank you. Very good. All right, thanks, everyone. We're adjourned.
Ooh, allez.
Good job.